Good evening, everyone. I have 7 p.m. On my clock, so I don't know if it's official, but I will call the meeting to order based on my clock. And welcome everybody to the Climate Action Commission Executive Committee monthly public meeting. I would like to begin this evening. Hopefully everybody has seen a copy of the agenda. Traditionally we do approve the previous month's meeting as a first action item. So I will move that the executive committee approve the February 4th, 2021 meeting minutes. Do I have a second?
I can second.
Thank you, Sarah. Any discussion about the minutes? Joyce always does a great job. She gets all those acronyms. Appreciate her always doing such a thorough job. There's no further discussion. All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Well, it is approved, and we'll move to public comment. And I don't know if we have anyone from the audience or whether anybody had submitted any questions for the committee. We did not receive any. Okay, thank you, Joyce. If we do have any attendees, we'll provide some time, or who have questions, we'll provide some time at the end of this evening to address those, but it doesn't look like we have any to open up. So we'll move on to the next item, moving along here. So we have really some important updates from a couple of our team leads tonight, specifically with the Pathways and Analytics team. Tony Underwood will be proposing a pathway that I hope we're going to end up voting and approving on tonight. We'll spend a good part of our time this evening on that. Also, Sarah Markowitz has come a long way in really putting a comprehensive community survey together that will greatly inform our further work in doing our cost benefit analyses and making sure that we're continuing to move the plan forward that's reflective of our community's values. My discussion now will probably make more sense after we sort of hear from them, but I did want to really get some ideas and interest. I think as we start to enter the specific action phase, starting to look at real costs and benefits of particular actions that will help achieve our sector goals that Tony's team has put together. I think some cross-pollination, specifically between our zoning, community engagement, and Mohammed's analytic or estimates team, it's going to be useful. I think there are several threads, particularly on what I would call sort of high impact items that will benefit from having sort of a working group, getting our hands a little bit dirty, that there'll be some issues that sort of cross some of these teams that we just want to make sure our assumptions are in line so that we're not working off some important assumptions that are not being engaged or addressed in the other teams. So to that end, I would like to start forming three subgroups across those three teams, because I think they touch on probably the biggest issues that we have regarding actual meaningful greenhouse gas reductions, and those include transportation, energy decarbonization, and energy efficiency and behavior. I think they provide some good self separation in the ways we need to move forward in addressing them. But I think between those three subgroups, if we're able to choose, I would say 2 to 3 actions that are substantial actions emerging from our pathways. And Tony's going to talk about some candidate actions that support his team's pathways. But I think if in each of these 3 subgroups, we can address 2 or 3 action items and really make sure we're well coordinated across the teams, that's going to pay huge dividends in a compelling plan, and it will pay huge dividends as we start to actually execute that plan at the end of the year and beginning next year. So with that in mind, I'd like each of the team leads to think about maybe a person or 2 on your team who could fit in one of those 3 subgroups. I am definitely open to any of you leading a subgroup. I will threaten all of you that if I don't get a volunteer, I will do it, and generally that will be I don't know, something that hopefully we won't need to. But I'm all kidding aside, I'm certainly willing to lead a subgroup. I would sort of encourage, and it doesn't necessarily need to be someone on the executive committee. If you have a member of your team who you think would be a good candidate to lead the subgroups, I'm open to that. So I'd like to give us about a month, between now and the next meeting. Think about 2 things, a couple of members from each of your teams who could fit in those subgroups. And then if you really thought you had a good candidate who could manage across those teams, I'm certainly delighted to consider them to be sort of a team leader. Again, I don't have any notions about how often those subgroups would meet, but I think, and that would be more of a working, the members could decide when they wanted to meet, and that would be sort of a working level, a workshop level thing that wouldn't be public, but would sort of contribute to the work that each of the teams is doing. Any questions about that idea? I'm hoping to maybe have those set up. I think over the next month, I would like to get some consensus of the 2 or 3 actions that we will pursue across those 3 sub-teams. And that can be just discussions on our, social media page or email. And then maybe by the next executive committee, we can settle on those respective action items within the subgroups. Mohammed, did you have a question?
I just dropped it in the chat. I just want to clarify, was it transport, energy, and energy efficiency? Were those suggestions?
I'll repeat them. Yeah, transportation, energy decarbonization,
okay,
and energy efficiency and behavior. Obviously, there's a little bit of overlap, right, between energy efficiency and decarbonization, but I think they're, one is more demand centric, the other is more supply centric. And there's still a nice separation there. I'll keep the conversation going about which of the actions that we want to pursue across those subgroups. But on your end, think of some members in your teams, perhaps even some leaders of the subgroups who we can put in those positions moving forward. And I think, again, after we hear Tony's overview of the pathways, those action items will make a little bit more sense of what we're talking about, like potentially what we're talking about that would fit in to be discussed across the subgroups, because the pathways team has put together a nice list of potential action items that could be good candidates to meet their sector reductions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tony, and I hopefully you all had a chance to review the team's candidate pathway, but he's going to go a little bit, provide an overview of it, and I'm sure answer questions if we have any. So Tony, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Joel. Yeah, so broadly speaking, would it be easier if I shared my screen and kind of scrolled through some of this along with everyone, or does everyone have it pulled up? It's up to you. It might be better.
Tony, for maybe the benefit of just recording this and for archiving purposes, why don't you throw it up?
Sure. Okay. All right, you guys all seeing that all right? Okay, well, so let me back up. Start from the beginning here. I'll try not to take tons of time, but leave plenty of time for questions here, knowing that you all have read this at varying degrees, perhaps some skimmed more than others, and that's okay. But you know, I think the starting point here obviously was the greenhouse gas inventory that Neil Leary and his team from Dickinson College developed last year. And you know, from that inventory was also developed let me get up to it here, this no action emissions forecast. And one thing to understand about the no action forecast here is that, you know, we intentionally did not use the term business as usual. I think that's a misleading term, right? This is a no new policies or no action forecast. And what we're doing here is accounting for things you might expect and drawing from basically statewide projections, many of which are coming from either Pennsylvania or in the case where we didn't have them, carving out some projections about growth from federal projections with respect to things like population and, say, increases in vehicle miles traveled out to 2050 and projections and increases in municipal solid waste. Okay, and one of the main reasons why, by the way, so it's in part due to that growth in population, in the economy, that we see projections in emissions projected to grow out into the future, right? So it's the combination of those two things. We have growth in population, growth in the economy, and no new policies that would in any way put emissions on a downward trajectory. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, to one of the assumptions that we use, which draws from the Pennsylvania climate action plans and their own emissions forecasting, is no changes in the renewable portfolio standards going forward, as well as no changes and actually a electricity grid that becomes more carbon intensive in 2050 than it is now, primarily due to the retirement of some nuclear facilities that come off the Pennsylvania grid. Okay, so just some context surrounding the no action forecast. So we then, you know, we all are familiar with our targets of 26% below 2005 levels by 2025, 80% below those levels by 2050. You can see those in the figure here. So I think where I want to start is looking at some of the assumptions and goals that we put together and why we ended up developing what we ended up calling a moderate and a rapid reduction pathway, which you can kind of visualize on the next page there, which I'll show you in a second. So broadly speaking, the actions here, and remember, these are what we call, for the purposes of modeling, kind of high-level planning scenarios, right? And so these are actions that we take and we can model in ClearPath that generate reductions in emissions in almost all of the sectors. Right? The big one of those, of course, is changes in the electricity grid. So that's why we kind of pulled that out as a separate assumption in terms of doing some modeling here. So broadly speaking, these changes, that's one of the main buckets, right? Reducing the carbon intensity of the electricity grid is the first big strategy we pursued here. The other was electrification or fuel switching more broadly. And then the third is improvements in energy efficiency and conservation, right? So that goes to that third piece in terms of conservation and behavior. So what we did then was we looked at two different ways of modeling the electric grid, focused on the percent of the grid that's coming from zero carbon sources out to 2035 and then out to 2050. In transportation, we focused really on two avenues of emissions reductions: vehicle miles traveled, and when we get to some of the more specific actions, you'll see that that can be achieved in several different ways. Right. The primary one there, of course, is mode switching out of private vehicles and into other forms of public transit. And then, of course, electric vehicle adoption. Right? Now, electric vehicle adoption is one of those places where, based on the level of policy uncertainty with respect to federal and state incentives, we just don't quite know the level of ambition, I guess, so to speak. And so you may look at these moderate and rapid projections for light duty vehicles and for heavy duty vehicles and, question, is that really rapid? Is that really moderate? Right. We tried to base some of this on some projections that had been done in the Pennsylvania electric vehicle roadmap. That actually is linked in here. You can go check that out. It's a pretty well done report itself. Okay, so that's motivated from some of those projections that Pennsylvania has put together. There, of course, is actions that the federal, state, and local government can do to support the adoption of electric vehicles going forward. Okay, so then a big chunk of the reductions in emissions coming from the commercial and residential sectors actually comes from the reductions in the carbon intensity of the electric grid. Okay, and so we pulled the electric grid out as a separate category, but because a large percentage of emissions in those sectors, in both commercial and residential, comes from electricity use, those reductions in grid intensity drive a lot of those reductions. So then here focused on fuel switching and energy efficiency, you can see these are basically similar, right? Similar ways of modeling these scenarios for commercial and residential. So a reduction in electricity use per square foot, a reduction in gas use per square foot, fuel switching from fossil gas to renewable gas, and switching from gas to electricity. Okay, so the first one, of course, is more of the reduction in energy use per square foot, is the high level way of looking at some energy efficiency improvements in these sectors. In commercial space, we talk by per square foot. In residential space, we talk per household, mainly because that's more straightforward in terms of modeling. Then you see the gas use, and the fuel switching are very similar in both commercial and residential. Okay, so before maybe showing the pathways themselves, any questions just on these? How and why we made some of these assumptions and how that worked, Mohammed?
Just my lack of education, Tony. I've seen that Pennsylvania electrical vehicle pathway report, but it's if I recall correctly, maybe we're talking about two different ones. That's only for passenger light duty vehicles. I'm just curious where the pathway, the estimates, even like the low end, high end for commercial came from. I'm actually genuinely fascinated by that. Where did that come from?
There's not very good projections on that level, honestly. So we had to kind of, in looking at some of the work that has been done there, You can see that effectively what we ended up doing was cutting what we did for the light duty fleet in half.
Okay. Makes sense.
And because we really had nothing better to go from, and so but after looking at it, there's been some work done on kind of what's called the medium duty fleet that has a little bit more specific numbers. So you can think of like the light box trucks, that are not diesel engines, that are still gasoline engines, and even some large pickups are considered more in that small truck and medium duty fleet. And so we looked at some numbers there to try to get a sense for what this may look like for the heavy duty fleet. But that's one of the places where there really is a lot of uncertainty in terms of the capability. I think there's going to be more of a battle there between fuel cells and electric vehicles, probably more than in the light duty fleet. So yeah, that one's pretty uncertain. We did our best to get a reasonable projection there.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I appreciate just being frank about where the numbers came from. And I'll put this question now, but for later on, I'm curious if we know the relative trade-off between a 1 percentage point movement on passenger versus the 1 percentage point movement on commercial. Because for ARIA in particular, it's an interesting sort of, I mean, I'm doing the cost benefit analysis in my head, but I'll be curious to hear about that later on too.
Yeah, good question.
Mohammed, just a comment. I mean, from our particular, just for our greenhouse gas inventory, our light duty fleet, light duty vehicle numbers were 4 times higher than heavy duty, but heavy duty actually contributed more to overall. So probably no surprise to anybody who pays attention to efficiencies, which is a long way of saying we really do have to pay attention to the heavy duty situation in terms of making real movements.
Yeah, really good point, Joel. In the greenhouse gas inventory, right, commercial heavy duty vehicles make up half of the emissions, right, from transportation. The light duty fleet is only half, but vehicle miles traveled are 4 times that, as Joel said, in passenger vehicles relative to commercial heavy duty vehicles. And remember, some of the assumptions there in the inventory were that we included all trips that either start or stop in the borough. So remember, on passerby traffic on the turnpike on 81 is not included here if they did not stop in town.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
Sorry, this might be a little silly because I know there's a whole section on municipal, municipal pathways and actions. But I'm just a little bit curious. So when you're looking at commercial energy and residential energy, is commercial including municipal vehicles like the snowplows, dump trucks, that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, I mean,
Or is that
in many ways, so the way we had to model some of the municipal, the reason you'll see, especially when we look at the sectoral kind of breakdown of emissions reductions here in a second, we really see that there's no reductions directly in stormwater management and solid waste, right? That's because we can't model them well in this way, even though they're pulling electricity from the same grid that we reduced, but ClearPath didn't allow us to apply those reductions in the grid to those sectors. But to your point, the way that would show up would actually be emissions from heavy duty vehicles, not as kind of a separate category. Now, the one thing to point out is that electricity use at municipal buildings would show up in commercial in the way that we organized this. Right. The problem, of course, is that that's all lumped together. We can't somehow pull out the municipal out of the commercial. So reductions in energy use in municipal buildings are just lumped into the commercial sector here.
That makes sense. Thank you.
And yeah, Sarah, just to follow on that. So ClearPath and ICLEI in general usually encourages the municipalities who do that to select either a public sector focused approach or sort of a community-wide approach. I think we chose the latter because, when you add up all the emissions from municipal operations, they're in single digits. which, we have more control, right, over municipal operations, but I think a more comprehensive approach was the direction we chose to go a while back. But to your point, there's no reason, especially as we begin to execute the plan, there's no reason we cannot model using ClearPath a municipal carve out, especially to track the progress that we have there. But it's, as Tony said, it's sort of absorbed in these numbers already.
No, thank you. That makes sense. And that was just like one of the thoughts I had while I was reading over this. I thought it might be helpful to kind of have those numbers separated out for the ways in which the borough is kind of leading the action, but maybe that's something that comes later, or, if that's not possible with the tools that we have, we can find other ways to kind of do that, Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think we can and will do that. I'm not sure they're going to affect our strategies too much, but I think I, for one, will be an advocate for tracking our municipal operations once we commit to a plan, and we should share that with the public.
Tony, do any of the, and I'm probably about to say some things that I only understand very superficially. The switch from gas to electric in commercial and residential use, are there assumptions in there that there's going to be greater renewables in electric? Number one. Number two, to the extent that there's not that assumption, or even if there is, and it's a gradual increase in renewables, this is the very superficial understanding I have. There's greater like line loss in electricity than there is in gas. Is that, I don't know what the studies look like. How does that factor in to these assumptions?
Yeah, it's a good point. And it's really not. And so we're assuming more of a 1-to-1. You replace this kilowatt hour of fossil generated electricity with a kilowatt hour of kind of zero carbon. That's the way that electric grid modeling works. And so any lost efficiencies in the grid, we're not going to pick up here, in part because we're kind of measuring it on the use end, right? And it's a good point that you brought up, though. One of the things that it kind of appears absent here in these high-level planning scenarios is renewables, right? They're not it doesn't show up here necessarily directly. We played around a little bit with directly estimating renewables on the grid, think, community solar, rooftop solar for commercial and residential. It's really lumped into the reductions in grid intensity here. And so the way to achieve rapid reductions in the carbon intensity of the grid is in part through those local small scale renewables and even large scale renewables. So it's missing here. It seems absent here, but it's really built in. And it's when we get into the more granular policies that we can look at those sorts of renewable energy programs that we can adopt to facilitate this transition.
All right. Okay. Thanks.
Tony, quick question for you. So the standard square footage for a home in the area, what you guys use?
Oh, good question. That comes from the American Community Survey. I don't know that number off the top of my head.
Yeah, we've been looking at numbers on that, and it's kind of challenging to determine like what the standard square footage is on a house. So,
well, and what I do know, we looked a little bit at kind of the American Community Survey does give a fairly rough estimate, even by census tract within the borough. And we have such variability in square footage across census tracts that looking at average square footage in the borough can be quite misleading, unless you're looking at the percentage of houses from the different tracts of town where
Right.
they're much different, right? So,
Yeah, it's different based on where you look at.
yeah.
Sorry, my dogs are fighting.
No, it's okay. And I can get you, I can get you the number that we use, Tony. I just don't
That'd
have
be
it.
great.
He said, yeah.
Tony, one quick thing. I think I know the answer, but it's sort of a follow on to Sean's question. I'm assuming as we look at the transportation pathway, over time, the percent, the reduction in transportation greenhouse gases is a dual reduction based on what you have as percent EV penetration, but also the increasing decarbonization of the grid. Is that correct?
Right.
It's both. Okay.
And in fact, that's one of the reasons why there's the kind of non-linear shape to the pathways themselves, because we kind of created what kind of an artificial here. I can just scroll down and look at it here. So in the rapid pathway here, it looks like there's something dramatic happening in 2035, right? Really, the reason it's that way is because we chose 2035 as a year for a particular target. In this case, 50%. So if you look back up here, right, we chose 50 in the rapid scenario, 50% of the grid coming from zero carbon. In the reductions are kind of they're interactive, right, with the transition to EVs over that same time period, right? So that's why you get this kind of what appears to be an inflection point of sorts in 2035, because we chose a target and then said, okay, now let's start again and let's work our way to 100% zero carbon in 2050.
Well, I bring that up because I really want to bring this attention to everybody here. It was a way of saying that the decarbonization of the grid is a force multiplier, right? So, if at 2035 we had 20% EV penetration, and then with no other additional penetration, we had a 50% improvement on decarbonization. We can still attribute that to the transportation sector, even though we haven't done so.
Yeah.
Hopefully that won't be the case, but it's really, really, seminal thing to understand how important the decarbonization of the grid is to not just commercial and residential, but to transportation as well.
Yep.
I have a question. In
Yeah.
your EV reductions, are you just including like traditional vehicles, or are you including things like e-bikes and scooters and those kind of things?
Well, we're explicitly in the modeling. No, we're basically just saying any vehicle miles traveled in the borough are being replaced by an electric vehicle, and we're kind of specifying what percent of the vehicles on the road by that time are going to be electric. So things like e-bikes, e-scooters, that actually would fall more under the reductions in vehicle miles traveled, because those would be substitute to vehicle travel, right? And so those are, if I was going to put that action kind of under a subheading here, I'd put that under the reductions in passenger vehicle miles traveled here, because I consider that more mode switching than I would really electrifying, because the emissions even from charging small scooters are negligible, especially as the grid's reduced. That's a good question, though, Tamla. Thanks.
That is a good question. Thanks, Tama. I think the considering them basically not worth tracking is a good assumption. It would be so small relative to everything else.
Right. I mean, in many ways, that's being the electricity use associated with charging them in the same way that it will for EVs is going to show up as increases in residential electricity use. But the benefit there, of course, is that the emissions saved by not driving combustion vehicles more than makes up the additional emissions coming from charging the vehicles, especially as the grid becomes less carbon intensive. So that's kind of a good way of thinking about how those are multipliers of each other. Okay, I don't want to spend too much more time going through some of these details. I know you guys have seen the rapid. So here's the rapid pathway. I've talked a little bit about why it has this kind of kinked shapes in 2035. We're not assuming some dramatic policy change there. It's just that we put an artificial placeholder for our projection about the grid there. So we end up with this shape. So that's, you can see rapid here and moderate on the next page. I just want to explain a little bit. I know this is probably getting a little bit small for you guys to see, so you might be pulling up your other versions, but what I tried to do here is consistent with what some of the other climate action plans have done. You can see that the rapid reduction pathways, I mean, the important thing to recognize here is that it gets us to about 88% below 2005 levels by 2050. All right, so that's kind of the top line number to pay attention to there. Whereas the moderate reduction pathway, you can see I put it in red here, only gets us to about 70% below 2005 levels by 2050. So we fall short of the target there. Now we actually are exceeding the target in the rapid case. Now on the far right hand side here, you'll see this is the percentage of total reductions. So we have a total reductions from the 2005 baseline to where we end up in 2050. What we then do is to say, where are those reductions coming from across these? Here we have 5 modeled sectors. Now what you'll see right away is that the water and wastewater treatment and the solid waste management, because of some of the deficiencies in ClearPath, honestly, we should be seeing some reductions there due to the reduced intensity of the electric grid. Those just don't show up in the modeling. So what you're seeing here is basically just the raw projections from the no action scenario in those 2 sectors, because some of the spillovers that should be occurring, both in terms of heavy duty vehicles, EV passenger vehicles, reductions in the electricity grid, some of the buildings there are commercial buildings, some of the reductions in commercial building energy use should be showing up. It's just not connected in that way appropriately in ClearPath for us to model those reductions. So the best way to think about that is that some of the reductions that right now are being allocated to commercial energy and say transportation should really be reshuffled up to those, what we consider kind of our municipal operations sectors. So they kind of are phantom zeros or phantom increases, if you will, because they're just not being modeled appropriately. We're not missing those emissions reductions, they're happening. They're just not allocated appropriately by sector. But largely speaking, anyway, the percent of the reductions that each sector is responsible for really just mirrors the percent of emissions that those sectors are responsible for. That's the biggest driver of those. You know, if you look back at the inventory, commercial energy is responsible for about 49%, and residential and transportation basically split the remaining half, and the other 2 sectors make up a small 4%. Okay, so that's what's mainly driving those kind of the allocation of reductions across those sectors. Okay, maybe a good place for questions again, if there are any.
Not a question. I want to highlight Tony's last point, because I think some of you may be wondering, you know, what are we supposed to get from a pathway, right? It's really it's a reflection of where we're at, right, with our baseline, knowing what the main reductions need to come from, and trying to carve a reasonable path across the sectors that is reasonable. And so, you know, obviously commercial energy, you know, from gas and electric, that's our biggest target. So I think the things we need to reflect is you know, are the assumptions valid? And I think really, as far as I'm concerned, I think the biggest thing we need to consider is, is the rapid pathway or the moderate pathway the one that we want to move forward? And I would submit that if you look at Tony's assumptions they use for even the rapid pathway, those are actually much more, for those who are paying attention to federal and even state policies, those are actually pretty conservative, right? Even the rapid ones are. And so I'm open to discussion on this, but I think anything less than the rapid approach would not serve us well, and it doesn't meet our targets. Personally, my biggest concern is that it's not aggressive enough, which isn't a problem in meeting our targets. It's a problem in constructing our ordinances and infrastructure to meet what might be a more aggressive decarbonization. That's a problem I would prefer to have, but my personal belief is the rapid approach that they've put forward is kind of a good balance between overly conservative and gives us room to respond to maybe a more aggressive federal approach. But I want to open that personal opinion up to the rest of the group to see if that's resonating.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, Joel. And I think, even if you are very skeptical of any talk of getting the electricity grid to zero carbon by 2035, right? Even if you're skeptical of that, which I suppose many are, it's an ambitious target. There's a lot of infrastructure requirements needed to get there. Even if you think we could do that by 2050, I mean, that's the rapid here, right? That's where, so we're saying zero carbon electricity by 2050, 100% zero carbon by 2050. It's like, as Joel said, it's a more conservative approach than saying, we're saying we're only going to get halfway to zero carbon. In the rapid scenario, by 2035, we're only going to be at 50% zero carbon, right? So,
Tony, can you scroll down to the rapid picture? And yeah, so I guess I mean, any more discussion in terms of what Tony's team has done, or comments regarding whether maybe a moderate or rapid approach as they've modeled it would make the most sense. If not, I move that we approve the rapid pathway as our candidate pathway moving
I
forward.
second it.
Sorry, just can I just ask one question to clarify? When we approve the rapid pathway, I'm just curious, like how much flexibility, and I know like I've already asked you, but just like also like so it's recorded, like just how much flexibility is in the rapid pathway once we approve it? And
it's a good question.
What will that look like? Yeah.
Well, it's one thing I wanted to make sure we clarified before we actually move to approve here. So, my understanding is that what we're approving here is the pathway, basically section 1 here, not all of the proposed policies and actions in section 2. And in part because many of them are still written quite vaguely, and we have not yet done the work with all of the other teams to look into the costs and benefits, including the co-benefits, look into feasibility in terms of municipal control and zoning and ordinances, all of that fun stuff that's going to happen. And so it would be premature. So to answer your question more directly, and Joel, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think how we achieve these reductions by sector is not what we're voting on here. What we're voting on here is that we want to achieve these reductions, right?
That's correct. And we're not, the potential programs that you see in the artifacts are not what we're approving. I will submit those programs will probably need to exist in any pathway, but just to varying degrees. But no, we're what the motion I'm putting forward would be simply to approve the reduction in emissions per sector as a basis for then approving actions that we would then need to make sure are aggressive enough to meet those sector independent reductions. So I guess the debate in people's minds, if they have any, is have we grossly, relatively speaking, across sectors not met our goals? Because there aren't too many ways to get to 80. It's all relative between sectors, and unless somebody has some reason to believe that relative allocation does not make sense, then I move that we approve the rapid pathway.
And I think what maybe Sarah, I don't know if this was maybe this is an inference from what you were suggesting, is that these are we're setting these as goals effectively, and then we want the policy to fit into that before we know sort of the feasibility of the policies and the effectiveness of the policy. You're setting that goal. You're saying we're going to try to establish policies that are going to achieve that goal. Some of these policies are it's a challenge of doing this on a local level, are going to be more influence based and advocacy based, and although there are going to be some concrete things that we can do when we talk about getting people to shift from, I'll go back to kind of the question I asked, from gas to electricity. We're not locally going to be able to force them to do that, right? We can maybe provide some incentives. We can provide some persuasiveness through our communications, but that type of thing is not going to be directly in our control. And I'm sort of, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but I feel like that's sort of like we're going to set these, and then how do we get there? We're going to establish how we get there and work hard to try to make that work. So with that sort of in the background, I'm comfortable with the rapid approach, knowing that it feels aggressive here, but we also, as Joel has said, I think in the past, in private conversations and probably in some of these meetings, it's a place we need to get to, and if we don't start establishing that now, and we act more, set our goals more conservatively, we're never going to get where we need to get, right?
I think that's a great point, and you made a lot of interesting points there. And that wasn't necessarily kind of exactly where I was coming from, but I guess one of the thoughts that I had as I was reading over this, and yesterday it like really hit me. I was like, exactly what are we voting on? Because I just wouldn't want it to seem as though we made decisions and then we're like coming to the community like, oh, we're engaging with you, but like actually like the meat and potatoes of like what's going to happen here is actually like really already been decided. And like when they're coming to it, it's like a moot point, and so when I looked at the whole document, I was like, man, there are things that I think people would really have some ideas about, maybe some feelings too. But like that was what I just wanted to like make sure I was like clear about, was like how much input will there still be after this vote tonight. And of course we've had a lot of community input so far. We're all, for the most part, community members, volunteers on the commission. But yeah, I just wanted to check.
Yeah. Well, and Sarah, it's a good point. I can reiterate this again. Remember, all of the proposed programs and actions in section 2 of the report are not what's modeled, right? To get to these pathways. You know what, we still need to go through some of the work to see, okay, in terms of residential rooftop solar, what is going to be reasonable targets in terms of how quickly households can get some community solar, can get some rooftop solar, and are those thresholds by 2035 and 2050 that we have in some of those objectives in section 2, are they feasible, are they reasonable, and what sort of emissions reductions are we going to get from them in support of this broad pathway, right? And so that's the work that is still yet needs to be done. We have some tools to model some of those in ClearPath. We don't have some of the tools we need in ClearPath to model some of those objectives. And so that's where we're going to have to, and I think in some of the subgroup and intra-team work that needs to be done now, the work that needs to be more iterative amongst the teams anyway.
And Sarah, I think another way of looking at this that is a good way of sharing with the communities is we've taken our single goal that's in our resolution, and we've basically just aggregated across 4 sectors. And that's a very high level estimate, which leaves us extremely a lot of room in each of those sectors. But you know, it does avoid the problem of someone saying, you know, we'll just put solar rooftop on the houses and we'll solve our problem. Well, okay, that can't because we do have to realize that there is some independence in some of these sectors, and that targeting these sectors sort of individually is going to be more constructive, and I don't, you know, I would argue that it doesn't crowd out any idea anybody would have at this point. It does. Going to a rapid pathway, I would say, in my mind, is the biggest immediate item of relevance. Is it makes our 2025 target a little harder, which I'm okay with. But I also think it's going to be closer to being realistic moving forward. So I move to approve the rapid pathway. Can I get a second?
I second.
Thank you, Tamala. Any further discussion?
Yeah, well, I just want to reflect on what Sarah said, and I think, sorry, I had the same question in my mind, and the way I reconcile that, to the extent this is helpful, is that I think we're setting out, you know, a pathway in the sense that this is a road we want to travel. I don't think we've agreed upon what the barriers are going to be, even how fast, you know, et cetera, et cetera. This is a bad metaphor, but I'm trying to do my best here. The point being that I'm trying to own the possibility that we set this goal, and frankly, at some point in our investigation, perhaps in the cost benefit analysis, we realize we can't reach it. And that actually might be a terrible result, but a possible result of us setting out this pathway, that in investigating and sort of evaluating the options, we just don't find a way to actually get here. We just can't figure out a way to get there. And so, and I think that's exactly what I'm hearing you say, Sarah, and what I myself was thinking about, which is, I don't think we have decided what to do. I think we've decided where we want to go, and how we get there, I think, is still a very close conversation with the community, at least from my perspective.
Thank you. That's a great point.
Anybody else? Some thoughts? Okay. Well, for the voting members of the executive committee, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. The rapid pathway has been approved. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tony. And great work to your team. I think your pathway is reasonable. It's achievable. I think it's based in some great assumptions, and appreciate and look forward to continuing to have your team work on some things that we talked about, but this allows us to get moving on some other things. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Sarah. Her team's been doing some great work, and she has some really exciting updates too, but I think she's going to spend some time talking about our community survey. Over to you, Sarah. Thanks.
Absolutely. Is it possible to share my screen and kind of just walk everyone through the survey real quick? Yeah. Okay, so, all right, so this is our survey so far. And a big thank you to Stephanie Taylor, who has done an excellent job getting this up and live for us. Almost live, it's not officially live yet, sorry. But this is what it's gonna look like. And we also are able to see the back end of it as well, what the responses will look like when we get them, which has been super helpful. So thank you so much for all your help. And Tamla, of course, was a huge help with the survey effort in the beginning. So thank you. And a lot of the effort, of course, has come from my team, all of it really. So it starts with that kind of the explanation of the survey, and then it moves through. And I don't know if everyone's had a chance to read through the community survey, the draft too. Not a whole lot has changed here, but you will see that the format of some of the questions have changed. And I need to post this actually on the Teams, and I'll do that immediately after this meeting. But basically what we're looking for is just any feedback that you have. And if you have a chance even to take the survey or have family members or friends that you can kind of rope into taking the survey for us and letting us know about their experience and ways that we can improve it. We're all ears. And yeah, we're hoping that it'll be live. Stephanie, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do we have a live date? If not, that's okay.
We don't have a live date just yet.
That's okay.
Soon.
All right. Yeah.
But are you also sending out print surveys too, I believe? Is that part of your plan? So.
That will be part of the plan.
Okay.
And then also, it does sound like we might be able to make this work. We'd also like to take these surveys, well, actually, using iPads, basically go to the farmers market and maybe even like the Amani Festival, just places where people will be, outside and hopefully able to socially distance. But yeah, hopefully we can find a safe way to also kind of help people to take the survey on the spot. I mean, we can just talk to people about what the Climate Action Commission is doing and kind of get feedback on the spot or get people just interested in the survey. And that's kind of our plan for right now. And hopefully, yeah, we'll be able to use those iPads to take surveys on the spot. And ideally, people are going to be signing up. So this is through, and I guess I should have prefaced this for those who might not be aware, but the borough is adding a community engagement tool directly to the website called Citizen Lab. And so this survey will be one of the first kind of live aspects of it, which is really exciting. So yeah, I won't take up too much more time because I know we are running a little late here. But yeah, please take the survey, give us any feedback that you have, any ideas for improving it. I've already sent a couple, well, actually like a big list to Stephanie of edits, and I think I have a few more coming for you. I'm sorry. But this is what we're working with so far. Yeah.
Sarah, I took the survey and I thought that the improvements were very well done and I like the format. Nice job, everybody.
Thank you so much, Tamla. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think as you work down, you also see like we can filter, we're not discouraging people who don't live in the borough to take it, but we can filter them out. We have a question that basically says, do you live or work in the borough? So as far as that's relevant, we have the ability to do some filtering. Do you have a deployment date set, Sarah and Stephanie?
Not a firm date just yet. Because like I said, people can take the survey with that link she just sent, but we want to drive them to our platform. So it should be, I would say, and before the end of the month, I would think. Would that Would you agree with
Can,
that? Yeah.
can I challenge you to deploy it by the end of the month?
I think we could, yeah.
I think that's
Okay.
possible. We'll do our best to hit that. There's a number of things we need to work through before we can flip the switch and be completely live. But you know, we're working hard on it.
I did have another, we were talking this morning, we were on a call about it. The way it's set up is we've set up climate action as a folder so we can have multiple projects, because we figure as you guys go along, there'll be more things we can add to get the public's feedback on. We can also do, in addition to the survey, we could have people just submit their ideas or thoughts. So you could come up with a prompt and just get people's thoughts on climate change outside of a survey, kind of what they're really concerned. Like if the survey doesn't quite meet what they want to say, we can also add that as sort of an open-ended project. It doesn't require a lot of work. It's just people will come in, fill it out, and you can look over it. So it's just another possible idea.
I think that would be really helpful. And maybe even like another one. I mean, I feel like I could just add all sorts of surveys now, but maybe even another one just like broadly on community values, like, you know, and just kind of help inform us
Okay, well,
continually as well. But yeah.
Oh, and Stephanie, I appreciate the fact you're using a new tool, and we're sort of using this as a sort of beta or prototype for our new tool. So you're juggling not only a new survey but a new deployment. I appreciate that, and you know, I will challenge you to see if we can get that up and running by the end of the year, because I think this is we'll probably, you know, I imagine we'll probably want to have maybe some very focused follow-up surveys as we move along in our journey here. You know, as we get more specific in the things we ask about, you know, we'll really be glad we have a good tool like this to deploy. And Sarah's being very, very coy and saying that we have some extra funds. She has successfully received some funds for us through a kind grant from the Center for Civic Learning. I think I got that right. And she has some wonderful ideas about, I don't know if you were going to talk about this later, so sorry if stop me if I'm spoiling you, but
It's okay.
She had some ideas of encouraging people with a LED light bulb perhaps to take the survey. So this is great. You know, this is exact sort of initiative I knew you all were capable and doing, and it's really helping. I think this is really going to add value to our product. So congratulations to Sarah and her team. I think it was $7,500 to help with our community outreach for our plan, and that's absolutely outstanding. Good job. Now, go around with the team update.
So I just have a quick sort of a question comment. So I know you went the survey out at the end of the month, and so distribution, marketing for it, placement, all that, just real quick, what do you have on that, Sarah?
Yeah, so ideally we'll be hosting some stakeholder meetings with CAN, Partnership for Better Health, Chamber of Commerce. We're going to use that stakeholder mapping document that we started a couple months ago, I think pretty heavily now. And in addition, I think it'll be, hopefully we'll be out at the farmers market and out in the public as well once the weather gets a little bit warmer, you know, using the Facebook, of course. Hopefully the borough page can also share it as well. And any ideas you have for getting it out there, I'm going to try to make sure we circulate it as much as we can in, you know, any newsletters. If you know of any environmental organizations, Tamla, who might be willing to share that information with their members.
Yeah, there's there's a lot of those. And I was thinking maybe with some of the extra money, you guys could put signages up, something that you could might get a lot of feedback is if you put a sign, you know, like go to the different Walmart, Giant or whatever. And while people are waiting in line for the groceries, and there'd be a sign that could guide them to the survey link or the web, you know, the web link, however you guys decide to hook them up, because I know you want them going in there. And then of course have signs at the library, downtown local businesses. There's tons of walkers in the neighborhood, so even posting them in different neighborhoods from Moreland Park to Forbes Path. I mean, you should be able to get a ton of just by putting up some just, you know, 8 by 11 signs and, you know, bigger places, of course, bigger signage. But that's some ideas.
I hadn't thought about doing paper posters, but that's a good idea, Tamala. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I do really like the idea too of taking it at the grocery store, because it is like probably the amount of time that you'd be like standing waiting for somebody else to check out. It's like it takes like 8 minutes or so to take it. So it's actually a really good idea.
And the link Sarah has put in the chat box for those who want to check it out. Well, we moved right over to, I don't know if you have any other updates for your team, Sarah. We're off the team lead updates.
Oh, updates from my team. I would say those are the two biggest ones. The grant from Dickinson College's Center for Civic Learning and Action. We actually, no, I do have one update. In addition to that grant, also, we may have a Dickinson student volunteering with us in the nearer future. So that grant was hopefully also going to incorporate a Dickinson student, which hopefully it still will, but we might have somebody working with us even sooner. So one of Tony's students in the, is it social innovation? And I'm not gonna, sorry.
Yeah, social innovation and entrepreneurship. Yeah, they have a
Okay.
experiential component that's part of the certificate requirements. And yeah, you know, all of those kind of experiential things, internships, et cetera, have been super disrupted over the past year. So this is a good opportunity for her, and she's excited about it.
Right. And we're really excited to have her too.
That's
So,
great.
I'll be meeting on Monday with her. And I think those are the big things. The community survey will hopefully be transitioning into some programming as well. So we did, oh, actually, Hans Pfister, he's a professor at Dickinson and one of our team members as well. With the Carlisle Tool Library last Friday, he gave a renewable energy talk. So he was basically walking through renewable energy and home efficiency as well. So that's still on the Tool Library page on their YouTube as well. And I think I shared it on the community engagement page, but if I haven't, I definitely will tonight. Yeah.
Great. That's great. Thanks, Sarah. Tony, anything additional for Pathways?
Well, not so much. I did meet with my team this afternoon, and mainly what we are looking forward to now is, in terms of our next steps, is we're planning to put together, we don't know quite what we're going to call them yet, but basically all of the research and information that we have about some of these more specific policies and what may be, you know, based from our perspective anyway, more or less feasible, what some super near-term strategies might be, some that may be longer term and require more collaboration, you know, and regulatory changes, and maybe longer term kind of by sector. So our goal now is to try to put together kind of some of those information sheets that we could provide and kind of share amongst all of the teams that may help facilitate some of the work that has to be done over the next several months as we get into some of these more granular actions. So stay tuned. We're hoping, you know, over the next couple of probably over the next month, we should have some of those put together and be sending them out.
Great. Thanks, Tony. And great work. Make sure your team knows how appreciative we were. I know they really, there was a lot more work involved in it, showed up on here, so I do appreciate it. Carla.
My team met on Thursday, the 18th, and we talked a little bit about form-based zoning. So form-based zoning is a way to regulate development that controls the building form first and the building use second, with the purpose of achieving particular type of place or built environment based on community vision. So we went through some scenarios there, just what it was that would make some sense from a standpoint of what would work in Carlisle. And I have forwarded Tony's summary report to them. So, you know, on your section 2, we'll be talking about some of those things and what that's going to require from a standpoint of zoning ordinances and you know, planning regulations.
Thank you. And Mohammed, you're still with us. I'm glad you were able to stay, but any updates for us?
No updates. I'll just say that I think we clearly have homework now, and it's time for us to take the baton. So acknowledging that, looking forward to it. And I want to say thanks to Tony and to Sarah. I think you've sort of like set a good pace for us to use the metaphor, and looking forward to it, carrying this forward.
Want to open it up to any other committee member who would like to update us or contribute here tonight. Basically, that's everybody on the screen. If you're not a team lead, you're on the committee. Okay. A couple things I just want to clarify. So maybe Stephanie and Joyce and Owen, we approved the rapid pathway. So it would probably be appropriate for us to update the page and maybe remove the other pathway, just so we don't possibly confuse people. So today we did approve a single pathway, and I'm happy to work with you to make sure we trim it to reflect what we actually approved.
Yeah, let me know what you want to
just
put
so
up on the
no
website,
confusion,
and
but
we can do that.
it'll just be maybe eliminating a couple pages, but yeah, I think it's worth putting that up. I'll work with you on that, and so for the next meeting, hopefully we will have resolved who's going to be part of these 3 subgroups. So over the next 4 weeks, I'll be reaching out to see if we can get at least one member from each team to be in each subgroup. And if you have somebody who you think could lead a subgroup, I would really love to entertain that. And then the second thing I'm asking all the team leads to do is to propose 2 or 3 of either the actions. If you look at Tony's report, there are supporting programs for each of these objectives, and I'd like to highlight two or three of them that we can focus on in our subgroups. That might be, deployment of charging stations throughout the borough. It could be any of a number of things, but I'd like by the next meeting to approve the specific programs that we're going to work across those 3 sub-teams by next meeting. So these should be kind of either or high impact decarbonization efforts, or ones that require complex interaction across the teams. So those are kind of ideas you can think about in terms of being candidates for those subgroups. And then maybe looking one more month ahead, I'm hoping by that time, okay, we're going to have enough results from Sarah's team's survey, and then Mohammed's team's thinking about how they're doing their cost benefit framework, to maybe look in May to really settling on our cost benefit factors, really, if for lack of a better word, and then maybe have some progress on the subgroups. So does anybody have, I know we were a little bit late. Anyone from the, I know there's a few people to join. Anyone from the public have a comment or a question? Okay, I don't think we have any. Anything else for the good of the order? All right. Well, I appreciate everyone joining and participating. Great work, some good news, and you got something, Sarah?
I actually thought of one thing for the good of the order, sorry.
Okay.
The Carlisle Tool Library is hosting a Fix-It Fair, the first one since the pandemic started, on March 20th. I just wanted to mention it because, you know, repairing and reusing is a great way to save the environment and prevents you from buying new things. So they'll help you fix anything from a chair, small electrical appliances like a lamp, that kind of thing. So stop by.
Okay, well, if that's all, the meeting is adjourned. Have a good evening.